Hello, this is Andres with Evelyn Lorena. She's the filmmaker of a great short called Gabriela. First, give us a little introduction.
As Andres said, I am the writer, director, and actress
Mhm.
in Gabriela. It was the recipient of the Latino Film Institute and Netflix's Indigenous Latino Fellowship. It was one of five filmmakers of that year in 2022. And the story itself is a very personal story for me. It's based on not only my emotional experiences as a Latina in the South, but also the ones of my family and their immigrant background. And so I think the main fuel originally was to explore and provide a story that was more humanistic and would allow a stereotype to be broken. But then as the story evolved, it became very much about personal freedom and learning to accept yourself and your culture and reconnecting with that, which is a very powerful thing. Once
Mhm.
you connect to those elements and those parts of yourself and the essence of who you are, it can really propel you with a lot of confidence forward. I'm not 100% a perfect, confident person, but it definitely helped me in that regard. And I wanted to infuse the story with that.
Great. So take me back first. I saw
Mhm.
the short, of course, and enjoyed it, and I think it's very important for us to talk about it right now in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to put it in perspective, if you tell us a little bit about your own immigrant story or your family's immigrant story and how it became a source for filmmaking.
What I can say is that there was, for a while, a lack of documentation, and there was a lot of struggle between two cultures and trying to make something of yourself. And I think a lot of that struggle that I saw, especially growing up, and that I've even felt as a person in the South, because the town that I'm from, was very small and rural when I was little. Now it's considered a very large, sort of almost city,
Hmm.
just because of the influx of so many different people. But I felt that sort of otherness. And I know that my parents must have felt that otherness because I saw it, and the frustration of not only trying to provide for your family, but not understanding the culture and still learning the language, and being sort of dehumanized and having to prove yourself. The thing that I hold a lot of pride about my family in particular is that they did surpass those expectations and those stereotypes, because my father would tell me the things that people would say to him, and it was incredibly racist, like to your face, you know what I mean? And this was like 80s and 90s that they were, getting some of that. And it's so interesting now because he's seen now as a respected figure in our town and made something of himself. And it's just like, if he didn't, have that sort of foundation of self, and that kind of like what Gabriela is going through of like discovering identity and pushing forth and having that resilience, I'm not sure how he would have, or how either of them would have done that. I mean, I guess, and that makes it, I think, a really universal story, because it's not just immigrants that have to do that. All of us have things that we have to be resilient about, things that we struggle with, things that we're facing in our lives. And I really wanted that aspect to be relatable to others, especially like you said, right now, because I think oftentimes we can say something's going wrong in the world, let's just blame immigrants. And and regardless of what you think about policy, I think the human part of that is that we can't just blindly blame people. I think we need to really understand who they are, and get behind that. And especially with immigrants, a lot, and everyone that I know that is an immigrant, regardless if it's Latino or not, are very hardworking, ambitious people and resourceful people, because they have to be. And that's a very admirable trait. It isn't, I don't think that's
Hmm.
worthy of being dehumanized. You know what I mean? So that was another um, thing about the story, is that I guess I got also tired of just seeing, immigrant stories being kind of seen as a second class sort of thing, or relegated to these very particular roles. And I was like, well, what about their inner life? What about their dreams? What about who they are? And that was again the main sort of original inspiration for the story.
Very well said. We can never forget this is a nation of immigrants. It has always been.
Yeah.
Um, and our society benefits incredibly from the work of immigrants at all levels, and including undocumented immigrants. Our agriculture is possible
Yeah.
because of it. But also the biggest businesses and the biggest business creators in the country are immigrants or children of immigrants. So it's an intrinsic part of ourselves, and I think it's all every chance that we have to highlight this kind of story, especially when it's so well told,
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
is very important that we take that chance. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say is that one of the things that's also been irksome, um, and I'll try to keep this in the film because I don't, want to veer into anything um, too political or anything, but I find it interesting when people sort of defend immigrants or undocumented immigrants as solely farm workers as well,
Mhm,
because that is an essential, like you said, essential part of society, existence, culture, etc. But I think people would be amazed to find out that the undocumented sort of experience is not just that. Like there are people that perhaps came here with psychology degrees and had to do something else,
mhm,
because I know people like that.
mhm,
Or, for example, maybe they didn't have documentation, but they opened up a whole business or something, very much like my parents. And and that's the other reason I think I wanted Gabriela to have a different vocation, not obviously because of the water connection too, but I thought it was interesting that she wanted to be a swimmer, that it wasn't just I'm going to go work in the field or I'm going to go, you know what I mean?
mhm, mhm,
um Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it was just more about extending the idea of what Latinos are for people.
mhm,
They are doctors, they are artists, they are lawyers, they are farmers, they are everything. And sometimes they happen to not have papers.
mhm,
And I understand the complications of that on like a social political level.
mhm.
And again, I'm not the policymaker, but I do know that in general, you know, I see so much scapegoating that just dehumanizes a
Mhm.
lot of this. And I don't find that to be any way to move forward in a progressive or um
Even
uh,
positive,
yeah,
like,
positive way. Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. Fortunately, we even have Congress members now who are undocumented, and
Right.
yeah.
That's what I mean. It's like it's wild that I feel like those stereotypes are harmful sometimes, you know what I mean? Because they limit capacity.
And I appreciate that you call it for what it is. And this avenue, because it's what I choose to do, is
Mhm.
one place where you're safe to speak and be as vocal as you want about your ideals and your politics. I do it all the time because I feel it's important. I think it's part of our moral fiber to speak out for things that are clearly unjust. And
Yeah.
dehumanizing people is never going to be something that is even defensible in at any
Right.
level. So, and we should call things for what they are. And the big threat now with millions of deportations is something that hangs over the lives of a lot of people. And from my perspective, for people who call themselves Christian, to have that attitude towards other human beings who need help or who have established a whole life, and to dehumanize in that way, it's like the antithesis of being empathetic with anybody,
Yeah.
especially in this country where we've all benefited from working together. And my hope is that we continue to do so. I mean, from my privileged position of not having been undocumented, I've tried to put this message out, but I always try to also empower voices like yours because you're speaking from your own experience, your own life. And I want to know also how you were able to convey this message so personally, but also express it so beautifully through your art. And how do you become an artist? How do you become a director, a writer? How was that path like?
I think from a young age, my father, I always call him a lost intellectual because he didn't have the resources in when he was in Guatemala to have furthered his education. Yet I find him to be one of the most brilliant men I've ever met in my life. Like, and I'm not saying that from like, oh, hero of parents. I truly mean that. Like his cleverness and his like resourcefulness in engineering is just wild to me. Like there's just no way I would never be able to do that. But he instilled, I think, in myself and in my brother, um, a huge capacity to dream and to look outside the box. And so I think just that naturally created a sense of me gravitating to artistry just because it's so um, creative and unique and wild, and I just gravitated towards language. Like him and I would read books together. He would read like quantum physics books to me when I was like 10 years old, and so I just gravitated towards language. And in school I was always in the school plays, but then to kind of circle back about them being working class, I felt that even though he had that intellectual curiosity, he was always um, sadly very practical and not always supportive of that lifestyle, because in Guatemala, the way that they grew up were, it was a very removed idea. So it's like dream, but you're probably not going to get it. You know what I mean?
I know exactly
Um,
what I mean.
yeah, you do. And so it's a very, sometimes I find other Latino families or friends that I have, they're like, yeah, that you totally get it. And again, I had the privilege of growing up in the States predominantly. And
Mhm.
so you kind of look at that and say, why not? You know?
Mhm.
But it's just a different culture. But anyway, they finally did become supportive when, you know, I went to college and saw that I was truly passionate about it. But it was hard. It was very hard for a while because they could not get it. But then, you know, I was an actor. I still am an actor. And then I transitioned into filmmaking through this film, just because it felt so deeply that I had to tell it. I can't tell you why, but it was there.
Then it resonates with me in so many ways. You have no idea.
Oh, great.
Yeah, as a filmmaker, of course, I did have the also the benefit of my parents being both educators, and they were actually very supportive of me becoming a filmmaker.
Oh, great.
But everybody else around me thought he was crazy that I was thinking about doing this kind of stuff, you know. It's understandable as well, you know, in many ways.
Yeah, I get it. Like it's the thing of it's just not real to them. That's
Hmm.
all.
Hmm.
You know, it's the same way that like if somebody said, "Well, why weren't you just an accountant?" It's just not real for me. Like
Hmm.
there's just no, I cannot grasp it. So it's the same, I think,
That's
on their
exactly
end.
me. My brain just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it does not. And my brother makes fun of me because I really do struggle with math.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you know, every day I get better, I hope.
That's exactly me. How did you approach the visual aspect of it? Because it seems very assured. It seems like you really have an idea of how to go about filming things and designing things.
Thank you. That means a lot. Because a lot through it, I, you know, it did sometimes feel well, I did have the assuredness, you're right, about the vision, but in terms of execution, there were times where I did feel um unsure of how it was going to manifest.
Mhm.
I knew it would, but I just wasn't sure how
Mhm.
sometimes. But a lot of that has to do with the team that you assemble too. Like, um, I sat down a lot with the cinematographer and the producer and the production designer, really trying to not only infuse my passion for the project and my vision, but having them technically then say, well, what about if we do this? Because then you'll be able to see this. And I'm like, yes, that works, you know? And that's a team effort.
Yeah.
That's wild. I'm not sure how magic happens through those moments, but it really requires, I think, a lot of communication, and being clear with that so that people understand what you're going for. And a lot of references too, because a lot of things I saw from previous films that I thought would work in the film. Not that I'm directly copying it, but it was more like inspiration from that. We did a social media post on that too, where we kind of outlined some of our references and inspirations, because I thought it was important to do that, because sometimes you can get inspiration from the randomest thing. Like, I don't know how much, for example, one of my favorite films is Phantom Thread by
Mhm.
Paul Thomas Anderson. And I don't think it's the same sort of film, but I found that the music in that was such a huge inspiration to the way that we did the music on our film, even though it's two very separate films. And so things like that, where you find inspiration in very little things, and you try to just communicate that to your team.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it a lot of it comes down to having that clear vision that you had, but also being a communicator and being a team player. And those are key elements that I feel that you allowed you to make this. And also, it's great to have that team around you. And in this
that was the
case,
hard part, because you
that's
have to really be discerning about, because you want to just sometimes grab, and I'll tell you, um, this is kind of an inside scoop. We had to switch cinematographers 3 times,
wow.
because the first time, great cinematographer, like, oh my gosh, he's so great. We just didn't see the same film.
Mhm,
And I was like, we can't do it. Even though you're so talented, you're one of the most talented people I've ever met, we're not seeing the same film, you
mhm,
know? So we had to switch that. And then same thing happened second time, you know what I mean? Well, there was more of a scheduling issue more than a vision. But the person that finally landed, I was just like, I felt it from like day one. I was like, she understands the material. She absolutely gets it. She started pointing me to references that absolutely were my references. And it's just like, that's what I mean, is like, when I say I don't know how that magic happens, because sometimes you won't find the right person, you
mhm.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
but thankfully we did. So,
great job. Yeah, great cinematographer. And were these folks from school? Were they also studying in
oh,
your?
no, no, no. Oh, so I should, yeah, so I should mention who they are, right? The cinematographer is Xenia Patricia. She's based out of London.
Hmm,
And she's fantastic. She um, does a lot of stillness in her cinematography, which is one of the reasons I ended up going with her, is because that was the important aspect of the film that I wanted to communicate. I find that in a lot of modern films, there's a lot of um, camera movement, and almost sometimes the over digitized sort of look of something.
hmm,
And I didn't want that at all. And I found that in her films, she uses a lot of film, which we also tried to do, but just for practical purposes, we couldn't end up doing film stocks. But so we did shoot digital, but we tried to make it
hmm,
as grassroots looking as possible, while also really sort of inspired by like a filmic,
hmm.
beautiful look. So it was a mixture of things. And yeah, Xenia was great. And then our production designer, Emily, um, she's a Los Angeles based production designer. Our producer, Maris Litica, is also LA based producer. So it's not necessarily people I went to school with, but yeah.
Yeah, I ask because I feel it's very important to demystify the whole process, and explaining
Oh
that has
yeah.
been very helpful. And because part of the reason we're doing this, and I like to do this, is also to inspire. Your work is inspiring, but also your journey, and having people see what is possible, and the fact that you have other women in the crew, I feel is so important as well.
Oh
It's
yeah, all of our heads of department, including like post music and everything, were female.
That's incredible.
So
That's
yeah,
great. Yeah,
yeah.
we need more of that for sure. What about the
Um,
other? Go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, what about the other aspect of the production, which is sort of the thorny stuff for a lot of people starting out, with the budget, and especially I know you're like me, mathematically challenged, but having the producers on your corner, how did that all work out?
Well, Maris, thankfully,
Hmm,
he's had 20 years of experience in the industry. He has his own company called the Blended Future Project, which is like a creative agency, trying to diversify the global media landscape. So he does everything from documentaries to short films to features, podcasts. He has newsletters. Like he's really got it going on in that regard. And he was very crucial in maintaining that, especially because he's had a career as first AD, as line producers, production
Mhm.
manager. So he understands all of that while also being a director and creative and an editor. So I think from production standpoint, I felt very safe, like really in good hands. I was like, we got it. Like he's going to take care of it. And he still does. Like whenever there were any issues, he was the one that was resolving it. Um, uh, all those kinds of things in terms of production. So I feel like I can just say, oh, find a great producer, which is not the easy thing to say, So I felt very fortunate and lucky in that regard.
Well, so how did you find that great producer? I guess.
Um, we met at an audition. I auditioned for his film, and he
Mm.
was like, I think you're super talented, which I was like, oh, thank you. And he just kept in touch, which I think is a sign of a great producer because you keep in touch, you do
Mhm.
your Zoom meetings and you do your little things. And I think sometimes producers can feel really separate or like above a lot of people, and they, like you said, needs to be demystified. But he was very down to earth and really wanted to um, tell these types of stories. And unfortunately, the project I auditioned for him fell through because of funding. So,
Mhm.
but like I said, he kept in touch, and then here we are. He's actually one of my closest friends and mentors in the industry. So I'm very fortunate that he's on the team. I guess he's sort of like mid-range in that way, but if if I had gone any kind of bigger, I don't think I would have had the same feeling on the film or the same accessibility that I have to him. Like I can text him at any hour, and he helps me with like all kinds of things, and
Mhm.
it's like a great working relationship, I think.
Yeah, you need those partnerships for
Yeah.
sure. And it's important that he also connected with you with the type of stories that you wanted to tell
Yeah.
specifically, that's the main
I feel
thing.
like here, as like a person, people ask me like sometimes because I struggled through a lot of health issues over the last uh, couple of years, very dire ones. Like I was in like in a coma. It was a
Oh,
whole thing.
wow.
Yeah, and yeah, it ended up fueling a lot of that personal freedom and self-acceptance aspect of the film too, because you go through a whole spiritual thing when you're like facing death. But um, um, uh, one of the things that people ask me is like, as like a person, they're like, oh, how do you not get frustrated with certain things? And I feel like curiosity prevents me from like not from like getting negative.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Or any of that. Because if I'm just constantly curious, like I'm like, oh, I wonder if they'd be interested in doing this. Ooh, I wonder if they'll do this. I wonder if, but I'm not, maybe I'm just naturally curious. I don't know. But I find that that's such a remedy for not just being in the industry, but anything,
Hmm.
you know. And I would say that most of the stuff that I've gotten has been from sending an email and being like, hey, are you interested? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Um,
I think that's an advantage also of being an actress, and an actor is
oh
always
yeah, that's
having to
true.
put themselves out there, right? So,
Yeah, a lot of
so you get
filmmakers sometimes are insular. Yeah, you're
insular,
right.
but you have that confidence, and the personality to match it. So you can break through, but it's important that people know that you have to step out of the shell a little
I
bit.
will acknowledge some of that privilege. Yes.
People ask me after my first film if it was hard directing and acting at the same time, but it's the only thing I knew back then. So I know
Yeah.
you may not have something to compare it with. Still, do you feel that what it maybe any of your talents or experiences, how did that translate into, well, at least you didn't have to direct another actors at the lead. That was easy communication. But did it have its
Yeah.
own challenges and its own advantages?
I mean, certain challenges in terms of stamina,
Hmm.
because when you're acting, you just go in for your scene
Yeah.
and then you leave. You know what I mean? Unless you have a lot of scenes in the film, but even then, like when it's not your turn, you get a break. The difference with directors, like you're there for every take.
Mhm.
um, I don't know how it is on bigger film sets. I don't
Mhm.
know if I'm assuming Spielberg is there for every take, but maybe not. Maybe it's just the first AD. I don't know.
If
Yeah,
it's like Christopher Nolan is on every single
which that's
bit
what
of
I
shot.
mean. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you gotta be. You have to.
Mhm.
I feel like if you have a very specific vision, I don't know how you could do it otherwise.
Yeah.
Because like maybe I'm just a control freak. Maybe that's what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah,
But
yeah.
like, I couldn't understand not being there.
Mhm.
Because Mars even was like, "You want to go take a break while Maria?" And I was like, "No." I was like, "I'm right here."
Mhm.
Um, but in terms of knowing any different, I don't know any different because it's the first time. And when people have asked me, I answer that way too. I'm like, I don't know. Um, but the one thing from like a director point of view versus an actor, because an actor, I feel like you have to be free and instinctual in the moment and on the day. You can't be planning it. In some ways, you have to have done that work before. So I did the same thing as a director, where weeks before, or days before, even with the actors, I was trying to get rehearsal time in. Like we flew them out a little bit earlier because I knew on the day I wouldn't have a chance to also be acting as myself and then being like, let's rehearse this thing. So we tried to get most of that out of the way and really work the scenes so that they felt freedom on the day and not me feel the pressure also as a director to, pull a David Fincher or something and say again, again, again,
Mhm.
again, because that would not have worked for me either. Um, so I felt that Morris actually was um, really essential in that because it was a lot of um, pre-production planning
Mhm.
and really being organized and just um, making sure that on the day things ran smoothly, which he did, because otherwise, the second in sort of that command probably would have been me, and then that would have taken or would have distracted me from the other creative stuff.
Mhm.
So again, maybe the lesson is find a great producer.
That's always good.
Yeah,
Can't go wrong with
yeah.
that. Did you use a lot of monitor to see the shot afterwards after you had played in it
I
or not?
did. Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. We had a nice, pretty large monitor. It was like you could see the whole thing. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
great.
yeah.
So it made it easier too, because when it's smaller, you gotta like creep and say, "Oh, I can't really see it." But when it's that big,
Uh-huh.
uh, you can just step out, see it. Cool, let's go. You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean?
Uh-huh.
We cut one of the scenes that was a really emotional scene
Mhm.
just for myself, but on my own, but it just didn't work with the rest of the flow of the film. But on that day, that scene in particular, Mars kind of had to watch, and then he was like, "Yeah, I think we got it." And then I would have to trust sort of his instinct because it was just so emotional. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't need to see it." I was like, "I trust if everyone around us is saying we got it, then we got it." Like,
It's always good to have the extra pair of eyes of someone you trust, especially acting and directing at the same time. And also because you have it's an interesting balance you have to strike of being in the moment, as you mentioned. It's sort of the subjective mind, and the role of the director oftentimes is basically being the objective mind of
wow.
orchestrating everything, and making sure you hit the marks and planning the shot and everything. But I think the key lesson here is pre-production is a great friend to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like I think my background as an actor, um, I come from Stella Adler, which
Mm.
is all about preparation. Like you
Yep.
are all about preparation and knowing the scene, the elements of the scene, the actions in the scene. Like it is so I think people in school used to make fun of us because we were the ones that were like sort of the nerdy ones about acting versus some of the other ones might have been a little more like instinctual and all these other and I would say Stella Adler's school is very instinctual. It's just that they really preface that before you have like um, a foundation. And so I kind of just took that as a director where I was like, well, it can't be that different. You're just empathizing with all the different other characters. You know what I mean? And you have to be prepared. So I tried to take that discipline into it. and really utilize pre-production. I would say the busiest time on the film was pre-production. Like post was chill, and
Mm,
then, you know, production itself was just, okay, we're shooting this for a week. Um, and there was just our hours, you know, but at pre-production, that was nuts. But it was, you had to be really regimented about it. Some of the people I have interacted with are like, well, you know, yeah, you have to be prepared. They're like, but you have time. You have the, I was just like, I don't want to look at it like that, you know,
mm.
because if I look at it like that, then it's going to be all last minute and I'm not prepared. And I don't want this and this story in particular to feel rushed, you know. And I said that I remember I had like a team meeting where I said I want the film, the culture of the film, including the way that we approach it, to be meditative, you know. And I want us to not feel like we're running around and crazy. And I know that might be a lot to ask, especially on the day, but the most that we can do now, prepping, would be great. You know what I mean? And I know that a lot of people don't have that luxury because of, you know, financial restraints, or the fact that if you're doing a short, sometimes it's just weeks before where you have to figure stuff out. And like I said, we had the luxury of the fellowship, which was, you know, giving us almost like a whole year, even though, trust me when I say the way that they formatted that, it still felt like it was just like 2 weeks. It was so fast. Um, but yeah.
People who haven't done it might think that it's a luxury or it's too much time they don't have to invest in their time on pre-production. It's going to save you
Oh yeah.
much costlier problems on production that you just not don't have a budget for. So it's always a good
My
investment.
production designer was like, she was so fun because she's been on a lot of sets. She's on sets constantly.
Yeah.
And she was just like, I'm so surprised that this was like as, I mean, there was some issues, don't get me wrong, but it was just, she was just kind of looking around like, how did this happen? Because usually, especially on independent, you know, if it's lower budget or any of that, sometimes you have some real disasters, you know, like Mars has told me some stories and I was just like, oh my gosh, you know. So I felt, like I said, really fortunate that that didn't happen. And I think, again, that had to do with a lot of our planning and pre and Morris's expertise too.
And also because preparation is what frees you. They're not they're not against each other. You know, it's not like freedom and preparedness are two opposites. Actually, you feel empowered to be
Yeah.
free as an actor, as a director, as any creative, where you feel like you have a staff down and now you can experiment. I feel. Um,
Yes. I had a teacher once tell me that there's freedom in the structure.
mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, isn't that how we live our lives? Like we're in a body, yet we find freedom in the body. You know what I mean? There's a box of our
Mhm.
reality, yet we find the freedom within that box. You know, she's like, it's the same thing with our art. It's like you have parameters, and then you find and
Mhm.
create the juice in the middle.
And also because you want to make those things muscle memory. I think of it
Yeah,
also
that's
as a
true.
musician, for example. The scales
Yeah,
might be boring, but the more you get stuff into your body where you're not thinking
yeah,
about it, then it just comes out. And then you can explore in ways that you couldn't otherwise. That you think, oh, I had this brilliant idea no one's ever had. But actually, many people have had it. And the more you study, the more you can actually innovate, for example, because you know what's come before. You've
yeah,
done the work and tried it yourself, and then you can make new things,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. Um,
Um,
that's why I always like, I mean, I feel a little blasphemous when I, you know, when I say it's my first film, not because I'm not proud of it or I feel insecure. It's just more that I've seen how much work a Christopher Nolan has put in. You
mhm,
know what I mean? And I admire that and I respect it. So for me, I'm always I try to have a little bit of humility in that regard because I still know that while I can accomplish something like the film, I
mhm,
also have a lot to look forward to and a lot more to grow, you know?
mhm.
And I respect the art form so much, whether it's filmmaking or theater or whatever entertainment is. I just respect all of it so much that Um, yeah.
a very, very healthy attitude. And speaking of preparation, someone that does a great, a lot of it, and I feel sort of very, very inspiring as well. And also as a person, he's such a great person. Is Guillermo del Toro, and
Yeah, and he
he's
was kind of some inspiration for our film too.
oh, really?
Yeah, the water stuff.
Oh, nice.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. He not only an incredible person, a good soul, I would say, and that to me is essential. And you
Yeah.
can see that through the films, and what people choose to tell is also very important to me. Um, but visually, the work he puts in before filming is incredible. He's an artist at heart and such a great writer. But also, he says something that I think is important as a counterpoint to what we're saying, to what we
Uh-huh.
both agree with. When you have the tools, you got to make something, and that learning, you got to learn by making, basically. so
Yeah.
so while it's always great to prepare, also a lot wouldn't get done if we thought, let's have everything perfect before we approach it, because a lot of part of the end of the journey in the filmmaking is also in the filming and of course editing. So you got to take that risk, and it's incredible that you took that risk and that you
Thank you.
accomplished. And I feel like when you were speaking about how how calm you wanted the set to be, or meditative, that it actually comes through in the film. I feel like the essence of the film, the way it comes out, it's kind of soothing, even though it deals with these heavy subjects at times and there's conflict. It feels like a lived moment, and it doesn't feel like it's rushed. It doesn't feel, it I think it plays and expresses what you intended to very well. So I'm happy to hear that was your intention, because you accomplished it, and that's a job well done, I think. So kudos for that.
Yeah, and it should be soothing, I think, in some ways, not only because the subject matter is internal and you want to think and feel about it simultaneously, but also soothing because you're healing like generations of stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know if people ever realize when it comes to identity, a lot of people, I think, especially now, and there's nothing wrong with this because I get it, superficial identities and things, but there's like the layer of superficial identity, which is, our race, color hair, type of person you are, the labels, right? But then there's like the deep identity, right? There's the spiritual identity where it's like the I am, you know what I mean? And
Hmm.
being able to look in the mirror and say, this is me,
Hmm.
um, regardless of anything. And I feel like that's what sort of Gabriela goes through, where she's doing the superficial identities and then she kind of there. And then once you get to that, you're like, almost when you understand the I am, it's sort of the healing thing for all the generations, because it's like, oh wait, we were always enough, we have such a richness as like people, and you can move forward with that, you know what I mean?
It got me wondering and thinking about the character of the mother, and
Oh
and
yeah.
because there's generations before us, and the
Uh-huh.
history that we carry with
Yeah.
us, our ancestors. But there's
Mhm.
also that immediate family, and that sort of contrast between the new world and the old world, in a way,
Yeah,
between
yeah.
you and your mother. So speak a little bit to that relationship and how you went about
Yeah.
creating
Well,
it.
I felt, besides Alma being like a flesh and live person with her own character stuff and motivations, I think as a symbol for her to Gabriela and to the film, I wanted her to represent culture. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And the thing that Gabriela couldn't face. And then at the end, she learns to embrace its love. She learns to embrace it for what it is.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's a journey, right? Like she's
Mm.
beginning to understand those things. And so I feel like that was the added complication of the mother character with her. It wasn't just, I don't get along with my mom and that's it. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
mean, that's like the superficial
Hmm.
layer of it, right? But then when you go deeper, it's more that the things she represents, the things that she wants for Gabriela's identity, and all these things, and I think reconciling with that is also reconciling with culture. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And that's something I can relate to quite a bit because um, I don't know if I ever resented my culture, but I did resent myself,
Mhm.
a lot because I couldn't be someone else, or I couldn't be like somebody else, or I didn't understand certain cultural references. And there was a huge part of my life where um, there used to be a scene in Gabriela where she would code, like
Mhm.
switch. She would switch
Mm.
from like an accent to speaking like really formalized,
Mhm.
but it didn't end up flowing with the film. But there have been situations where I've had to do that. And then it was really lovely when I did get sick, having that reconciliation with my parents in a deeper way. Like it's not that I didn't get along with them, but it was just, not only was my life hanging by a thread, um, and I had that whole spiritual experience. It was very much, seeing them for the value that they carry and who they are as people and the culture that they instilled in me, whether I want to believe it or not, it's subconsciously there.
Mm.
And I have a lot of respect for that now. And I think a lot of people of our generation are going through that, which is what I wanted to infuse in the film for our particular, generations now and backwards, is that the reclamation process of that, you know what I mean? Where you're reclaiming even immediate family cultural aspects and things like that, as well as the bigger ones. And um, yeah, and having a lot more respect for that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely very important. We need to get into the health part of it, which you just touched upon, because
Uh,
well, I'm very curious about, of course, how it ended up influencing the way you approach the film
yeah.
during the shooting, but also however back you want to take us to let us know what was going on. It depends on you.
I try to be a little more open about it because I want it to be a source of inspiration versus a source of any kind of shame, which I don't have shame about necessarily, um, but I don't necessarily over publicize it either, because it's something that's really sacred to me too, because a big thing in Mayan tradition, as I'm sure you know, is, the sort of shaman journey. And I feel like a lot of people now throw that out a lot, where they're like, I'm a shaman, or I went through a shaman journey, and they just went and did ayahuasca or something. And I'm not judging, but like, um,
Yeah,
but it
the
wasn't
trendy
that.
part of it.
Yeah, I don't want it to come across as that, is what I'm getting at. So
Mm.
anyway, there's a big part of, shaman culture in my culture. And when I discovered more about it after what happened to me, I was really drawn to the idea of somebody being able to alchemize light and dark. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of like an artist, a little bit. But the idea of, being able to face those darker things and finding freedom in them and finding ways to make them productive or positive. And I guess in Eastern culture, I guess it would be like the yin and the yang, you know what I mean? That whole concept.
Mhm.
But anyway, I found that really interesting. And I was like, well, this story is already about a mixture of Mayan elements and this and that. And I just found that that journey would have been, if there's a way to find the idea of personal freedom being like a very internal thing. And a lot of people who
Mhm.
suffered really
Mhm. Mhm.
traumatic, awful things will talk about that. Even though they couldn't escape the physical, they had to find like the internal freedom, right? And I don't want to be pretentious enough to be like, I went through the thing, but it just, I related to it, is what I mean.
Mhm.
But yeah, the being in like beds and restricted, and being told that you might be, not able to, I mean, I don't remember it, but being told that you're not able to, maybe won't wake up, and all these things. And you have to kind of find that inner, not only will to live and resilience, but the idea that you create that freedom too. It's not just what's outside, which is a very powerful thing, because then you can sort of become almost bulletproof, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Not that, I'm not gonna jinx myself and be like, Sure. I mean, in the sense that it makes you a lot stronger in that way and resilient and to a lot of things. And I wanted to infuse that learning experience into the film.
Definitely. And now, physically,
Mhm.
in the physical plane,
Oh yeah.
that also had a direct effect
Yeah, like
on.
I was like I have to do these stunts for the water. And it was so we just did them dry for wet. Like if you've seen The Shape of Water,
Mhm.
which if you
Yeah.
see Guillermo del Toro, the way that they did that was very similar, actually, I think, to the way that we did it. I don't know the exact details, but
Mhm.
we used the wires and hanging from the soundstage, and we were also very fortunate. Um, Screen Gems at the time was able to provide um, the production in kind to us to be able to do that, which is extremely generous. My mind was
Mhm.
blown when they offered that
Mhm.
because I was like, this is a major studio giving us their soundstage.
Mhm.
But he was really moved by the story and everything. And so we were able to get that and just create with really, high quality, high class gear and do that. But yeah, in terms of the day stuff with the health, just a lot of planning, just making sure everything is kosher. And, we had a great stunt team. We had a great medical supervisor. I also, at that point, I think had just learned to listen to my body a little more. You
Mhm.
just have to, like, I think anyone who had any kind of chronic illness or disability, you just learn really quickly how to listen. Like you become almost like oddly superhuman that way, where you're just like, something's off. I got to figure it out. So thankfully I sort of had that awareness of that and everything went smoothly, thankfully. So you've just gone through something that your perspective is just not the same. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But it also gives me a lot of empathy because I know that, everybody has their own struggles and that's okay.
That's
That's
life.
just my
Yeah.
journey. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
And
thank you for the thoughtful questions. I really enjoyed being able to speak that. And that the fact that you were so like open to that too, because you understand a lot of the immigrant sort of experience. So
yeah, no, there's so much in common. I appreciate it, and we'll keep the conversation going. I'm happy
yes,
to
please.
look forward to everything that you're gonna be able to bring us in the future. So keep it up. Si se
Yay.
puede.
Se
Take care.
puede, sí se puede.